Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a Triad production. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. I would imagine that most listening to this podcast today have taken their fair share of tests in their lives. Some have likely even sat for some of the more tougher tests out there that are mandated often for licensure and certification for their field. Most of us, in preparing for these exams, typically prepare the same old way we did throughout our educational process, utilizing the same old study process that got us through and doing our best to manage our stress, our anxieties, and our fears. But what if there had been a way for us to not just become better test takers, but to have a way to have crushed our test-taking fears and anxieties? It's likely that most of us will continue to take more, just give me back over this part right here. It's likely that most of us will have to continue taking exams throughout our careers. And for those coming up through the ranks, exams will most certainly be a part of your rite of passage. Well, that's why I'm excited for today's show and my guest, Dr. Ben Bernstein. Ben is a psychologist, a teacher, performance coach whose career has spanned 40 years in education, psychology, and the arts, including coaching in such diverse settings as psychiatric hospitals, prisons, primary schools, and universities. Ben is the author of 3 books, A Teen's Guide to Success, Stressed Out for Parents, and Crush Test Anxiety, How to Be Calm, Confident, and Focused on Any Test. Today, Ben is going to be sharing with us strategies for exam anxiety and solutions we can implement for better test taking. Ben, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Graham. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
It is a delight to have you. You know, Ben, as we jump in today, I know that more times than not, our professional areas of focus, to some degree at least, involve a story of how we ourselves struggled through an area that we now help others through. How did becoming a performance coach, writing your book, and coaching folks through exam prep become part of your career focus?
Well, let's see. It started at an early age 6, when I was a very prodigious piano player growing up in New York City. And I loved playing the piano. And I had a teacher who took that love and pushed me on stage for recitals and competitions and national auditions. And I really hated it. I wanted to play the piano. I love playing the piano, but get on stage and my hands were shaking, my knees were shaking. You can't play a Brahms piano sonata with everything shaking. So it was extremely anxiety provoking for me, and nobody helped me. I got comments like, "What's the matter with you?" or "You'll grow out of it," or "It's all in your head." And none of that rang true. And it kept going. And I stopped playing the piano very abruptly at age 14. So it's, answering your question is, I think there are like 4 phases. This was the first one of this anxiety that continued on when I went to university, and I was really interested in stage acting. Same deal, loved to get on stage, but once that curtain went up, the anxiety just went through the roof. The next stage was when I got to graduate school, and I realized I have to conquer this because, studying clinical psychology, you really have to deal with your own issues. And I started to work out what was happening for myself. And when I got out of graduate school, the third stage was when I had my postdoc internships in psychiatric hospitals and in prisons. And I realized, the people they wanted me to do regular therapy, and I just didn't feel that was going to be the most helpful thing. So I proposed these creative projects, making films, writing musicals, doing all these things for the patients who experienced a tremendous amount of joy, and these are people who were seriously medicated or put away for years. And that clued me into what happened in the last phase, which is when I started my private practice. And I realized I'm just not cut out for what most therapists do, which is sitting and really in depth listening to people and working through issues, longstanding issues and problems. I am a much more active guy, and I want to actualize a person's potential. So that's when the performance coaching really began, that I started to work with people who had to perform, actors, actresses, athletes, lawyers, dentists, people who had to perform under high stress situations. And it really peaked when my wife and I moved to California. This was in 1993. I had taken the EPPP, and I was an early student at academic review to study for that test, and passed that, got licensed in Connecticut and New York. And then we moved to California. And at that time, you had to take an oral exam in California.
Mm-hmm.
And the pass rate for first-time takers was only 15%.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Oh. And I joined a group to do what everybody else did. And I couldn't believe these people were all failing the exam. And that's when I really started to figure out what was going on, which is that they got disconnected when they went to take the test. They were very adept. They were clinically well-versed. They knew the material. At that time, I was taking AATBS for the oral exam. So I'm a graduate of these programs. And the programs are great. They're very comprehensive, but they are like almost all test prep material. They really prepare you with the content of the exam, what to expect, all of those things. But there's a whole other stage, which is the performance stage, where you have to actually perform. So I actually think more of my work is performance anxiety rather than just test anxiety, because we all have to perform actually every day. And just thinking about what you said in the introduction, we all do face exams of different kinds in our lives, but we face tests every day.
That's right.
Every single day. And, I start to really think about what was going on, how to best help these people. And I take a lot of my work from sports psychology, because if you think about athletes, particularly Olympic athletes, are at the top of their game and they have to perform, billions of people are watching. What are they doing? How does it work? So I developed a model, and that's what I've been using for the last 40 years.
What I like is the way you're framing this is that although we're talking about exam preparation here and managing test anxiety, it's actually under a larger umbrella, isn't it? A performance anxiety, whether it's with lawyers, actresses, athletes, test takers. It's under this performance anxiety. And that's an important understanding, isn't it, here?
It is. And then, of course, it broadens out to that we're all performing every day.
Every day.
Right? All of us in our lives, whether you're a parent or you're a CEO or you're a frontline worker, or
that's right.
We're all performing. So how do we perform at our best? And that's the model that I created. And when people come to me and they say, I have to pass the EPPP, I've taken it 7 times, or I want to score, whatever on the SAT or ACT, I say, I want you to pass and I want you to score, but I'm going to give you tools that we all should have gotten in the 2nd grade. And these tools are going to be just what you need to pass this test or to get the score you want. And you're going to be able to use them in all kinds of situations. So,
in fact, one of your reviews that I read had a gentleman saying the very same thing. He said, I was able to pass this exam with Dr. Bernstein's help. However, these strategies and these approaches and these techniques about performance in general have really helped me in other areas of my life. So I really like broadening it to, if we can take these strategies that we're going to learn about in our time with you today, these are applicable and generalizable, aren't they, to other areas that are our day-to-day stuff?
Yeah, and that's great. And when I work with people, I point that out to them, that when you work with me, it's really helpful if you practice the performance tools that I give with this model that I created, but practice them all the time. When your kids are screaming, when you see an email that you don't like, when your boss is yelling at you, you can be practicing these tools all the time. And the more people practice, the more they realize that this is helpful. The other part of that, I would say too, when people come, they are so focused on the exam. So it's like life, exam, life. And I point out to them, yes, there's a real rise in pressure and in stress, but let's naturalize that, for want of a better term. Let's put this in the context of your whole life. So it's not like that. It's like life, exam, life. It keeps going on.
Right. So you're helping them kind of reframe this and maybe right size this in a way that it doesn't have to have that big blip. As we're going to be talking again about what some of the strategies and techniques and approaches you use, but let's help us be educated a little bit more. There can be different levels of test anxiety, can't there? From the proverbial butterflies in the stomach
Mm,
to a level of severity that actually impairs learning
correct.
and interferes with test performance. Much like what you said at the beginning of your show, you love you love the piano, but the level of anxiety can impair one actually performing to their inherent potential. What are some of the various levels experienced by people that are typically seeking you out?
This is a great question because it points to the science on which my work is based. So in the early 1900s, two psychologists, Yerkes and Dodson, did the first research on how stress affects performance.
That's right.
Actually, it was about arousal, but we don't use that word because it has other connotations, you know, in our time, but how stress affects performance. And it's a bell curve, right? So too little stress and too much stress, performance starts to go down or deteriorate. But then there's just the right amount of stress. And that peak where there's just the right amount of stress is where performance is optimized. This is true around the globe. It's one of the most researched studies in the field of psychology. So the key here is related to your question is where are you on that curve? Most people come to me and I say, first thing I say is I show them the curve, whether they're an athlete or a dentist or whatever, point to where you are. And usually they point to that side of the graph where stress is too much.
Right.
Okay. And what I explain to them is that what we're going to do together is we're going to work together so that you can identify when you're feeling stressed and you can get yourself back into that middle place. So yes, you're absolutely right. People come with, you know, from a very mild symptoms, momentarily forgetting material or feeling tense or distracted to almost full-scale panic attacks. I mean,
Yes.
I've had a couple of people on that score where some people have pointed off the page where they are. Right. So, so my job as a coach, as their coach, is to work with them to identify just where they are and where they want to be. And then we work with it. And if I can continue about this, the key here is that people start to think about stress in a very different way. We tend to think about stress as my kids, the government, COVID, and it's a lot of finger pointing. As if all those things changed, my life would totally work. Well, all those things are not going to change. That's called life. And the stress that you're feeling is not because of those things. It's actually your reaction to those things, which is the stress that you're feeling. You know, I hold up a piece of paper. I don't have it right here, but I hold up a piece of paper that says test, T-E-S-T. I said, so you're saying this stresses you out? And the person goes, yeah, Dr. B, test stressed me out. So I said, this is a piece of paper with 4 letters on it. So what you're saying is, I put it down on the table. What you're saying is the piece of paper is jumping off the table and choking you. Right. And then they laugh. Because it's not, it's a piece of paper with 4 letters on it. It's your reaction to that, which is usually historical in some way, right? That's causing that. So once people, once people get that, then we can actually proceed into what they need.
I think that's a fun, you know, it's a very helpful and I think a little playful way for them to kind of realize that, hey, where's my locus of control? Is it externally where I'm going to be only as good as those things around me? Or can I, like what you're encouraging, can I have an internal locus of control that maybe I haven't even recognized that I'm not using that internal locus of control that I inherently have, which can be part of my underlying cause for my test anxiety. And you're helping them kind of right-size this and maybe reframe this and change that locus of control, aren't you?
You know, I have had a number of interviews like this, Graham, and you're the first person who actually nailed it in this way, which is that it is a shift in the locus of control. That's actually not terminology I use because I don't use it. There's no value judgment on it, but you're absolutely right. And what occurs to me when you say that is that we're not trained in our schooling to have an internal locus of control. You do what I say. You have to do this, you have to do that. In order to do, you have to do. And People just keep doing what they're supposed to do, but they don't develop. Thank you so much for that. They don't develop the internal locus of control. That's really helpful. Thank you.
And thank you. What I'm hearing is that you help them reclaim that. I mean, without that, we understand that some of the levels of, anxiety around exams or just performance in general can, show up in physical ways, like you're saying, with the sweating or the shaking, the rapid heartbeat, dry mouth, or behaviorally, where we see it all the time with tests, they become avoidant or procrastinative, or maybe, cognitively, when we get stressed, we have memory problems or difficulty concentrating, or that negative self-talk cognitively, or even emotionally that can manifest, our anxiety can manifest around a test. Even emotionally, where we become depressed or low self-esteem or anger or feelings of hopelessness. But when you're saying, hey, what if we can change just the way that we look at this?
That's right.
And what if these four letters on this page aren't as dangerous as you might interpret them to be?
Exactly.
We can begin there with kind of resetting that cornerstone and reclaiming that locus of control. I really like that start.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great. And the way it's really helpful. The way I follow that up is to explain to people what's going on when they are feeling stressed. So let's look at this together. You go into an exam, and there are three parts of you. There's your body, your mind, and your spirit. Those are that's the totality of who we are. That's what's operating in any life situation, any performance situation. Now, we know from years and years of research in different fields that there are optimal states in the body and in the mind and the spirit for optimal performance. The body wants to be calm, the mind wants to be confident, and the spirit wants to be focused.
That's good.
Now, so the training that I do, you said help people. I actually don't help anybody. I train them. I train them to become aware when they're losing it in 1, 2, or 3 of those areas, and how to get themselves back. So there's 2 parts of the training. One is awareness. Awareness, so for the body, is, are you feeling butterflies? Is your breath stopped? Are your shoulders going up? Awareness in the mind, from performance terms, the mind is what you're saying to yourself about yourself at the time of performance. So are you saying negative things like, I can't handle this, I'll never pass, I'm not a good test taker? Or are you giving yourself positive messages? Stress goes up when you're giving yourself negative messages. And for the spirit, which is the part that we routinely avoid for all kinds of reasons, but it's actually, I think, the most important, it's your driving force. Let's remove it, or separate it, I should say, from the context of religion or spirituality, and just think about the spirit in you, which is what's driving you to be a psychologist. Why do you want to get a good score on the MCAT? Where are you going with your life? That's your spirit. So spirit manifests as staying focused, having a goal, and taking actions that get you to your goal.
I really like laying those out like that. Each part has something that it uniquely is trying to really embody, the body, mind, and spirit. It wants to be calm, confident, and focused. When you, in all of these years, and the expanse of people that you've worked with, what have you learned about the underlying causes of anxiety performance for most?
Sure. The underlying causes are usually negative experiences that we've had, right? Particularly at early ages. I remember in the 4th grade when we had a test, and I would sit there and I would just be nervous as all get out, and the teacher would be walking around. And so we start to get wired up. We actually start to get wired up that in order to pass or to do well, I have to get so anxious. I have to overcome this anxiety. Right. You don't overcome anxiety. You dissolve anxiety. You reduce anxiety, right? I don't talk about managing stress. I talk about reducing stress. Managing sounds like you're just carrying around a big trunk on your back and you just have to manage it. No, we're going to reduce it. I want to show you something. Hang on one second.
Yeah, please.
So this is the model that I use, which is a 3-legged stool: body, mind, and spirit. When all 3 legs are equally strong, this is a very sturdy platform for performance. But if one of the legs gives out, or 2, this is the effect.
Yes.
So your focus goes off the test or the testing situation, and it goes on to how anxious you are, or I can't figure this out. Your mind starts to go kerflooey, and then you're thinking about failing the test. So this is a really terrible state to face any test in, because you've lost your center, basically. When you talk about locus of control, Graham, I'm going to use that from now on. When you talk about locus of control, that's what we're talking about, right? You want to be calm, confident, and focused.
I really like those. Really like those. I like the idea too that we don't, we can manage stress, but it's like carrying something. But you're talking about dissolving it. You're talking about reducing it. I found, whether it's performance in a relationship, I do a lot of therapy. So performance in a relationship or parenting, all the things you're talking about, I do some sports psychology as well. It is a lot of times about our fear of failure, maybe a fragile ego, the imposter syndrome coming into this last gatekeeping test.
Of course.
But the role of our history plays such a significant role. I remember in 5th grade, I was giving a talk on Johnny Appleseed. It was a poem that I had to memorize. I was up in front of the class and I was so nervous, and I didn't realize, but my leg was shaking like nobody's business, and the class was laughing, and I had no idea what was happening.
Yeah.
Over the subsequent years, I developed a stutter because I became so afraid of what, how I was going to produce things or present things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kind of mastered that, got through that and understood things. But you're right. Those early experiences can really shape the way that we see ourselves. And going back to the control piece, really could be some of the underlying causes for anxiety, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when people come to me and they say initially, and many people do this around tests, they say, I'm not a good test taker. And I pause for a moment and I say, well, if you're not a good test taker, what's the point of you coming here? Because you've already sealed the deal. I'm not a good test taker. How about considering, in the past, I've had a lot of difficulty taking tests. That's a radically different statement than I'm not a good test taker.
That's huge.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. So when I can work with people to just shift that, you didn't have tools, you didn't understand what was going on with you. You have a lot of what I call unproductive habits around tests. Lots of unproductive and a lot of unconscious habits. Here, I'll give you another demonstration. Okay, so I watch a lot of people over 40 years take tests, and this is one of the things that happens. The examiner gives out the test and says, begin the test. So watch carefully. The person opens the test and goes, huh? So when I'm talking in front of an audience, I say, what do you observe? And people say, oh, you got freaked out or you hit a wall. Or so I say, watch again. And I'm going to exaggerate. Begin the test. Huh? I'm holding my breath.
Oh, I'm not breathing.
So when you hold your breath, what's the message that your brain is getting? You're dying.
Yeah.
Is your stress going up or down? It's going up. Is your performance going up or down? It's going down. So I've trained people. One of the things I do with exams is I train people in something I call 3-point breathing. And if you're listening to this podcast, use it. 3-point breathing means before you read a question, every question, you exhale. Before you read the answer choices, you exhale. After you bubble in an answer, you exhale. So what does this mean? It means you're regularizing your breath through the course of the test. That holding the breath, your whole system going into high alert, sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, gets dissolved. So people, you also get exhausted at the end of 4 hours of doing that. So people who practice, and this is a key word in training, in any training, athletic training, musical training, practice. You have to practice. This is not an idea, right? I gave a workshop at a big Eastern university, and in the break, one of the students came up and she was very irate, and she looked me right in the face and she said, I've done the breathing thing. And my heart just went out to her. I know what she meant. But I said to her, look, we're all doing the breathing thing. This is not a one and done. People, have a session with me and they go away and they're all turned on. They come back and they say, have any more tips? You got any more tips? So I say, look, I'm honored to give tips to people who are servers in restaurants. I'm not giving you tips, I'm giving you tools.
Yes.
And you have to learn how to use the tools. Believe me, they're not complicated. Breathing is one of the most simplest things that we ever do.
When you put it this way, these are tools that it's not like, hey, I'm gonna turn this on now because I'm in this situation. You're saying these are things that can become an integrated part of our lives, whether it's our attitude,
beautiful,
or whether it's our breath. And I was thinking about the attitude piece. Mark Twain said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, either way, you're going to be right.
That is
you get
great.
to choose.
I love that.
And then
That's
when you're
great.
talking about this breathing, which is great, the exhale is the most important part of the breath because it activates the vagus nerve.
That's exactly right.
Which relaxes everything. So that that emphasis on the exhale. So you're saying these are tools that you get to implement in your life, whether you're parenting, whether you're waiting in line, or traffic, or how do you perform in whatever moment you're in with your attitude that's lined up properly.
That's right.
And also with the ability to manage and reduce whatever stress begins to get aroused within you. Really good.
Right. Yeah. So it's so great that you picked up on the exhale, because this is a fairly recent thing for me. I gave a workshop in the heat of COVID for hospital CEOs, okay, about the most stressed out people in the country, hospital CEOs. And we went through an exercise related to the calm tools. There are only 9 tools, 3 for being calm, 3 for being confident, and 3 for being focused. And we went through the calm tools. And for whatever reason, I was really focusing on the exhale. And when the feedback session, one of the gentlemen said, it's the first time that I got it about breathing. Most people say breathe, and I'm saying I'm breathing. What is it? So it was so helpful because it made sense. We're actually holding our breath. We don't need to breathe. We need to exhale. So thanks for picking up on that. It's a really big difference.
It's a great suggestion. And I think the emphasis on that, and actually it's the exhale that we can control the best.
Yes.
And there's something about psychologically being able to say, if I can't control anything else, I can control my breathing in this moment, and the physiological effects of that bring down my heart rate, my blood pressure, my eyes dilate so I can see things better. And I got this oxygenated blood in my system now because my blood vessels are dilating, and I can be in a best state to perform whatever I'm doing that's in front of me.
That's right. So imagine, so I do this with parents. Your kid comes in the room and screaming, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." And many parents, and I am not faulting parents, it's probably next to teaching one of the most difficult jobs in the world. Kid comes in, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." And the daddy says, "Calm down."
Right.
So when daddy gets trained, when kid comes in and daddy gets trained, as the kid's screaming to just exhale, is a whole different ball game goes on.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I call the induced reaction. We get induced. That's like a riptide. We get pulled into that. It's like a riptide. We get pulled into that when really we can be centered in ourselves. Again, locus of control, centered in ourselves.
Isn't that a great thing that we have control over that with the right kind of breath and the emphasis on that?
Yeah. Well, we have control also over our thinking.
Yeah.
We can't control the thoughts that come to us, but we can definitely control what we do with them. So for instance, every good exam is going to have items on the exam that you have never seen before or that are worded in a very difficult way. This is purposeful on the part of the examiners. You need to expect this. So when a person looks at something, even though they're really, well informed and they're prepared, and they immediately have this, what I would call a disconnecting response. Oh my God, I don't know what this is. I can't do it. That's the thought. But then they know they need to learn, and this is where the tools come in to be confident, how to turn that around right away, right? So that they can get connected and be able to deal with the problem. So the 3 tools for being confident reestablish that connection to I can do this rather than I can't.
Really good.
Right. Same thing with focus. Excuse me, just let me finish this out. Same thing with focus. When we get distracted, This happens all the time for everybody on tests. You get distracted. Something happens in the room. The proctor does something untoward. You start thinking about, your children, or if I don't pass this, I'm not going to be able to stay in the state. It's a distraction. But if you can catch it, I'm saying when you can catch it, you know how to reestablish your focus on the question in front of you. So one way of thinking about all this, Graham, is that the training that I do with people is the training to stay present, to be in the present. Because that's the moment when you're reading a question, that's the moment when you have to answer a question. The clock is ticking, you want to be present. Again, look at any great athlete, they are present.
Yes.
Right? They miss a basketball player, misses a foul shot, they don't stand there and go, oh my God, my career is falling apart. No, they just know how to get back in gear. When athletes talk about this quality of presence as the zone, when athletes talk about it generally, the way they talk about it, oh, wow, man, I got in the zone. It's kind of mystical. One of my teachers called it misty moisty. It's not. It's a process of becoming more conscious of where you are at that moment and where you want to be and knowing how to get there immediately. That's the training.
That's really good. You're talking here too, when we begin to get distracted, whether it's something the proctor had done or some other thing that comes into our mind, you're talking about teaching people, training folks, coaching folks into kind of regaining that equilibrium in those three areas, the three legs of those stools, and quickly reinforcing whatever one is out of balance right then. So that equilibrium is reestablished. And interesting enough, and when you think about athletes that talk about being in the zone and they think, oh, that was one of my best performances. No, that's your potential every single time if you know how to stay in that state. And the elite athletes, they've trained themselves.
That's right.
To stay in that state for longer periods of time. When the other athletes kind of dip for a moment, that's when they've got them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. No, you're terrific. What a great psychologist you are. Because I mean that, because think about this for a moment. When you say your potential, so I was asked to give a workshop at a major Eastern university, 27 varsity teams. I coached all the coaches on one day and all the team captains the next day. So the first thing I asked the coaches is, what's your goal? And they looked at me like I was from some planet way out in the solar system. What do you mean? What's my goal? The goal is to win. And I explained to them, winning is an outcome. The goal is that all your players play at their best, and they play at their best together. That's the goal. We can't control winning. You can't control the score you get, because you don't know. There's so many variables with winning and getting a score. What you can do is to perform to your potential. That's really a big point in all of this.
That's really good. So you're talking about, there are two kinds of goals. There's effort-based goals and there are performance-based goals. The effort-based, the performance-based goals, we may not always be able to control. Maybe the moon's in the wrong place, or maybe I didn't have breakfast properly, or I broke up with my girlfriend, or something happened that's going to affect my performance, whether I'm recognizing or not. And if everything is based on that performance or outcome, I'm only as good as I'm successful that night. Versus, what if I focus on my effort, that for the most part, I can control so many factors in that.
Absolutely.
And if I can do that, if I do right things here repeatedly, chances are my performance is going to kind of take care of itself. I love that refocus.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But again, it goes back to the way most of us were educated.
Yeah.
We were educated to give right answers. We were educated to do what we were told. We were educated to get through this so that you can go on to that. It was not really about real learning. How much do you remember from the fourth grade?
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't about real learning. It was about repetition, memorization, regurgitation, getting the right mark so that you could go on. It's
Really
not
good.
about staying in the present. We don't have that kind of training. So this is a big reset for most people. And they need it, because what happens is that we just all develop very unproductive habits.
Yeah.
And those unproductive habits get in our way. So another way of putting this is that stress, this is a definition of stress that I came to, that I use. Stress is a function of disconnection. You feel stress when you're disconnecting in your body, or you're disconnecting in your mind. I can't, I don't, or I'm not. Or you're disconnecting in your spirit. You don't have a goal that's your goal, or you keep getting distracted.
One of those three legs, disconnecting from
one or two or three legs.
1, 2, or 3, yeah.
And because it's such a dynamic system, if one goes out, it's going to just affect the other two.
Yeah.
So you can start anywhere. I developed a self-diagnostic tool. I hired a research psychologist to great expense about 20 years ago to develop a self-diagnostic tool. It's on my website. It's free for everybody. So you can get a reading on your three-legged stool. And once you get that reading, you can focus in on which area do I really have to start with. But truthfully, you could start anywhere and it's going to lead to the other two.
Really good. Hey, talk to us, to our listeners here. You have a very, you do individual coaching, you do group coaching. Walk us through some of the stages. I know there's there are 4 of them that you walk folks through that come to see you. Give us a sense of those, would you, Ben?
Well, thanks. The first one is, it's similar to what we do in all therapeutic situations. It's a diagnostic phase. Like, I want to hear the history. I want to hear what's compounded over time to give you the habits, the unproductive habits that you have. So whether it's in individual work that I do or through the book, or recently I've just mounted 2 online self-directed courses, you have to go through a stage of self-examination. It's absolutely essential. Okay. So that's the first stage. Second stage is to do exactly what you and I are doing, is to show them the Yerkes-Dodson curve, talk about the scientific basis of all of this. You really need to understand that stress is affecting your performance. What's the new definition of stress? That what we're going to do here is, so it's a ground, it's like setting a foundation, right? Mm-hmm. The third phase is to actually start putting this into practice. And practice means practice. You can't, it's just not going to happen on exam day. We can't just drop a habit. We have to replace it with a new habit, a productive habit. So this is a challenging phase for people because old habits die hard, and we have used old habits to get through situations, and somehow we have it wired up that I have to be nervous before a test because that's how I've gotten through all my tests. That's miswiring.
Yes.
Okay. Again, a certain amount of that juice, I'll call it that energy, that's not the same as getting stressed out. You need a certain amount on test day, on performance day, to perform at your best. So that practice phase is essential. And the more people practice, the better. Now, part of the practice phase for any test is to, if you're taking like an exam like the EPPP or the SAT or whatever, is to start to analyze your answers. This is actually not well done generally, which is analyze your answers. You want to really understand why you got something wrong. And then you also want to understand why you got something right, because believe me, people get right answers, but they lucked out as far as I'm concerned. Right. So analyzing the answers is absolutely essential. Tucked in there, though, with practicing is studying. Most people, the basic thing with most people is that they will always put off the most difficult part of the exam till the last thing to study. And that's a big disconnection right there, because you're thinking about it all the time. You're afraid of those questions coming up. All the people who have come to me over all the years who take the EPPP, I would say 90% say statistics. I can't do statistics. I can't. So where is statistics on your hit list of practicing? Yeah, well, I'll get to it. I'm going to do the. No. You got. Let's put that at the top. Now, people don't like that, but they get it right away that when you're focused, this is a focus issue, and you conquer the most difficult thing, it paves the way for so much ease later on.
That's so
good. This is the whole retraining. Then the last part, of course, is carrying this into the exam itself. And that has to do with how you're getting ready, preparing, all the practice that we've talked about, learning all of that. But now, what's the week before? What is the day before? What do you do on exam day? And again, people have so many unproductive habits around all this. We just clear those out and put productive ones in their place. So
that's really helpful, Ben.
Yeah.
When you're talking about this as well, along with these coaching strategies and approaches and tools that you're equipping folks with, how important do you encourage them, or how important is to encourage folks to understand that during this time of preparation, self-care is really an important piece, whether it's, prioritizing their time of study, letting other people know what's going to be going on, getting supports, accountability. Talk about the self-care piece of this.
No, you're nailing it, Graham, because taking an exam is generally a lonely process, right?
Yes.
So we need support. We need to have our family understand it, or our partner understand it, or our boss understand what we're going through and what we need. And I encourage people, get as much as you can. If you need an extra day off, or you need, let's really talk about what your options are. And often people are reluctant, if they're in a job, to get a day off. I say, in the week before, you need a day off, as much as you can. So the self-care part is important. Now, so what does that also mean? It means adequate sleep, certain exercise, but there's a hidden thing in here, which I absolutely highlight, which is how you study. Most people study in a very unproductive way. I have a 3-hour block and I am going to concentrate. Well, the brain is not really set up. It's not a computer. It's not really set up for uninterrupted studying for 3 hours. So I train people in what I call rounds of 30 minutes is, we know this, is a optimal amount of time. Some people it's 20 minutes, some people it's 40 minutes. You set a timer for 30 minutes or 40 minutes. You have one goal, you turn off all devices and you just work. Take a 2-minute break, bathroom, stretching, glass of water, that's it. Come back, do another 30, 2-minute break, the third 30, and then you take a 20-minute break. Now in those 30 minutes, the first 30, you tackle the most difficult thing right at the top. Then you switch to something, you relax the system, you switch to something easier, then come back and take something more difficult. When people study, for instance, for the EPPP, I have them prioritize all the domains most difficult, most challenging to least challenging, and they build their study plan around that. Very, very helpful. So taking the pauses. One last thing about this self-care. When you're studying, when you're sitting in front of a computer or books, you're using your eyesight. Without getting too far into this, the eyes are directly connected to the nervous system, which means when you're reading, you're using your foveal or your central vision that's hardwired to your sympathetic nervous system. So by definition, you're amping yourself up while you're reading. Central vision was connected to, that's a tiger, that's a lion, right? So it's fight or flight. So training, after every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you do a resting eye exercise. There are 3 that I teach people.
Really good.
And when you take the exam, you practice all 3. I mean, practicing, you practice all 3. And when you take the exam, you implement them. Oh, I don't have time for that. No, you don't have time for that because you're not doing it.
That's right.
Your whole system is geared like this. So when they do it, guess what? They're not tired at the end of 4 hours.
No.
This was a major finding on my part. You have control, self-care, you have control over whether you're going to be tired or not, simply by resting your eyes regularly through the course of the test.
It's really good. You're talking about that state learning earlier on. We can practice these things in our preparation that then translate and generalize over to the actual test setting itself. I love the idea too of blocking out your study periods. We know that after about 25 minutes of reading intensely, if you continue to push yourself through, you lose about 80% of what you try and intake.
Exactly.
And this idea too of supported reading, where if, while we're reading something, if we can read out loud and actually hear it auditorily, or if we can have it read to us while we read, maybe we've recorded it somehow, or it can be read out loud. Our learning increases by 38%. So these strategies really have some science behind them.
Oh, yeah. No, everything
wonderful,
science-based, because that's the value of science. What we don't have enough, really anywhere near enough science is behind the spirit part. That's why we rule it out. If you can't see it, you can't measure it. And if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Right. Untrue. Yeah. The spirit is what's driving you. This is where you want to be a really good, you want your license, you want to be a good psychologist, a social worker, right? Whatever
that's the juice.
That's your spirit. But we really avoid this. And that is the energy that drives your being able to stay focused. The word focus comes from the Latin that means hearth or fireplace. So think about that for a minute. Hearth or fireplace. What's a hearth or fireplace? It's an old school word, but think about it. Light, heat, energy, sustenance, gathering. All is about focus, gathering your energies, sustaining yourself, nourishing yourself, giving light, giving heat. So when we turn on that function of ours, the spirit, that's what humankind has driven humankind to accomplish great feats.
Really good.
Right? Mozart, Marie Curie. I mean, you can name Mother Teresa. It's all focus. It's staying connected with their spirit. But we just don't cultivate that in our education systems.
As you're doing this, there are times as you're trying to cultivate this in folks and maybe helping them reclaim some things that have maybe been taken from them in our educational system or other, maybe our parenting, whatever it may be, that kind of takes that ability to have an attitude a certain way or to develop some of these tools. One of the hopeful things I was thinking earlier, to misname this real quick, these tools, these strategies, these things that you're teaching and coaching, the good news is these are skills that can be learned. It's not like, oh, I'm either born with them or I'm not, or I've lost them once and I can never reclaim them. These are skills that can replace old habits that we've developed to compensate for whatever we needed to compensate for, but interfere now with our learning process and kind of cause unnecessary anxiety. So I love the idea that these skills can be taught and people can reclaim some of these things that can really help them be successful and reach their potential.
They're your birthright.
That's it.
They're your birthright.
Yeah.
Right? No child came out of the womb thinking, I'm a loser. I can't handle this.
That's right.
This is a product of culture, of our civilization, of watching TV or on the web. Every commercial is negatively based. You don't use the right shampoo. You don't drive the right car. You don't live in the right neighborhood. Negative, negative, negative.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, this is our birthright to be confident, to have this, because we all have potential. Yeah. All of us, every single person has potential, but we don't really, that's not really what we cultivate. Last thing I would say about this too, is that education, the word education also comes from Latin. It has two roots, educare and educere. One of them means to draw forth, and one of them means to train. So think about it for a minute. Our educational system is mostly based on training. It's not about drawing forth. It's not about really drawing forth from the person. Who is she? What does he really, where is he headed? And then comes the training. We just superimpose training. This is what you have to learn. It doesn't matter why, just you have to learn it. I was very fortunate when I graduated from college in 1969-70 to go to England, and I was trained in very progressive schools in really poor neighborhoods. The kids came to school every day, and there were 5 to 10 different activities that they could choose from and engage in, and we as teachers had to track their interest and teach them what was in their interest. And that's the drawing forth and the training. Totally different.
What a nice frame, it's not a reframe. It's a explanation of how we've kind of switched those. We're training first, but we're not drawing out who the person really is and what their gifts and skills and abilities and talents inherently are.
That's exactly.
Draw those first and then train around those. I love that.
Well, it goes back to what you said, about what you said about locus of control. It goes right back to that.
Really good.
You are yourself. You will always be yourself. You will never turn into another person. Why not get with the program, really learn about who you are, and then cultivate that? You're not going to cultivate a rose like you would a papaya tree. It doesn't work that way. You
Yeah.
get cultivated for who you are. So, yeah.
Despite people's best efforts, and there are times when people do not pass their exam.
Yeah.
How do you help them understand what not passing actually means, and how do you help them frame that?
Well, first of all, you do have to deal. We have to deal with disappointment, because there's so much buildup around exams, to passing, to getting the best score, all of that. So they're acknowledging and accepting disappointment, but the acceptance also means just accepting that this happened. You can't change it, but what you can do, once you accept anything, you can ask yourself the question, how can I grow from this?
Mm-hmm.
So when people come to me for coaching and they don't get the score that they wanted, and this happens, or they don't pass, this happens. We immediately, I tell people right before the exam, I say, after this, the next session is going to be, we're going to celebrate or we're going to strategize.
Mm-hmm.
So we strategize with a person who doesn't achieve what they wanted to achieve. What did you learn from that experience that's going to help you the next time?
Yeah.
So here's a little story. When my wife and I moved to California, I was licensed in 2 other states, and I had to then take the California oral exam, which was a horrible exam. I mentioned this before, right? And I got into these groups and people failing left and right. And I such great clinicians, so knowledgeable. And I saw what was happening is they got disconnected when they crossed the threshold. So I coached them, and people were like, wow, you should be doing this for a living. This is really, and I said, this is what I do for a living. Okay, we all went to take the exam. They all passed and I failed. Yeah, I failed. So was I disappointed? Yes. Was I angry? Yes. Was I out a lot of money? Yes, all of that.
Yeah.
But, given my own training and who I am, what did I have to learn from that? So that time you could go to Sacramento in California and you could listen to the tape of your exam. Mm-hmm. And I went to listen to, and I heard in the first 3 minutes, I knew why I had failed, because I was a flipping encyclopedia. I was answering way beyond the questions. And it was a really good learning experience, not just for the exam, but like life. So I went back and took the exam, answered the questions, passed. So that lesson is, what do you learn from this? Right? This is a big life thing, Graham. We have to learn to accept what happens in our life, even when we don't like it, even when that's not what we want to happen. Life is life. Accept it. Then ask yourself the question, how can I grow from this? Not why is it happening to me? What did I do to deserve? None of that. How can I grow from this? And it transforms the whole business. It doesn't mean you're not going to be angry, you're not going to be frustrated, but those things get mitigated when you put it into a different frame.
I think that's a critical mindset. Either we're going to succeed or we fail is what we think. But no, it's not. It's I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to learn.
Yeah. And it's not even or. I'm always learning. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I'm going to get what I wanted on this thing. And now I'm going to have to learn other things or apply what I learned. It's an ongoing process. That's it goes back to that exam thing rather than, what did I get from this? Okay, I have to do it again. Many people who come to me in a more severe place of real anxiety or total loss of confidence, and this gets hammered when they fail 2 times, 3 times, 8 times, right? They learn the tools, they practice the tools, they go back, take the exam again, and they don't pass. But what they report is, I was able to do it without getting so anxious. Yeah. I was able to do it when I saw an item, I didn't freak out. So that now that's the other part. They're on a different plane now. They go back and take it again, they pass.
Really good. Really good.
Exactly. So you accept what goes on. How can I learn? You learn and then you move on.
Great. Ben, we're come to the end of our time today, and I would love our listeners to learn more about you, your Be Your Best Performance coaching website, and your book, Test Anxiety. Give us some resources on how to find you.
Well, the big hub, for a better word, is my website, DRB Your Best, DRBYOURBEST.com. The book you mentioned, Crush Your Test Anxiety, But what I realized is that the book was written about, I don't know, it was 14 years ago, the first edition. The publisher wants me to work on a new edition. There's a lot of new material. So I decided to put this into an online course because people really need something that's more self-directed, that's not dependent upon an hourly session with me, where they can really absorb this, they can replay, they can go over things again and again. So I created two online courses. One is Crush the EPPP, because I was getting a lot of, I call them refugees from the courses, and I'm not faulting the courses at all. I took them. They're incredibly comprehensive and useful and taught by really good people. But this performance tools part is something that I can afford them. So I did Crush Your EPPP, and now the latest one, which has just started, is Crush Your Test Anxiety. And it goes beyond the book. And in fact, we include a copy of the book with the course because it's a good reference to have.
Really good. Well, Ben, I have so enjoyed our time together today. It's been a delight, and we're learning so much. So thank you for joining us on the podcast today. My total pleasure, Graham. You're a terrific interviewer, and I'm not saying this to make you feel good, but locus of control, I got it now, and I'm going to use it. And I really appreciate your listening and your availability and enthusiasm and encouragement. Thank you. It's been great to participate with you today in this time. So thank you so much. And thank you. I also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Ben and me today. It's always great to have you with us. I want to remind you that our episode today and its resources and all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. So check out our webpage, triadhq.com/BHT, and explore our archive of podcasts and other resource materials. Thanks again for being with us on the show, and we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.